In the quiet town of Riverside, Indiana, during the fall of 1997, a 15-year-old girl walked out of Lincoln High School and disappeared without a single trace. She didn't run away. She didn't leave any note, and she never said goodbye. One moment she was there by the school gates, laughing with friends, and the next she was gone from sight, forever. For 13 long years, her family searched every street, every field, every possibility they could possibly imagine. But the question that haunted them most was truly the simplest one of all. How does someone simply vanish in broad daylight in a town where everyone knows everyone else? Riverside was the kind of place where people still left their front doors unlocked at night. A town of maybe 12,000 people where the biggest news was usually just the high school football scores on Friday nights or maybe who won the pie contest at the county fair. Main Street still had the same diner that had been there since the 1950s. Same red booths. The Methodist church sat on the corner where it had stood for over 100 years. Life moved slow here, predictable and safe in all the ways that mattered to families raising their kids. The old steel mill on the edge of town had closed down 5 years earlier, leaving behind rusted buildings and the memories of better times when everyone had steady work. But people stayed anyway, raising their families here, trusting their neighbors like they always had. Nothing bad ever really happened in Riverside, or so everyone back then firmly believed. The Morgan family lived in a white 2-story house on Maple Avenue, near the center of town. Robert Morgan worked as a mechanic at the local auto shop, fixing cars and trucks for neighbors who'd known him since childhood. He was a good man, steady and reliable. He'd raised Ashley alone since his wife left when the girl was just 8 years old. The divorce had been quiet, uncontested, and his ex-wife had moved all the way to California without ever looking back. Robert never spoke badly about her, just focused on being both parents to his daughter. Ashley was 15, a quiet girl with long brown hair and a shy smile. She liked reading books alone in her room, listening to music on her CD player. She wasn't the type to get in trouble or stay out late without calling home first. Her teachers at Lincoln High said she was polite, did her homework on time, and never caused any problems. She's one of the good ones, her English teacher had said during parent-teacher conferences. Keeps to herself mostly, but very thoughtful and kind whenever she does speak up. Ashley had 2 close friends, Sarah and Emma, girls she'd known since elementary school. They ate lunch together, studied together sometimes, but Ashley rarely joined them for other activities. She preferred staying home, helping her father with dinner, watching the TV shows they both liked. "We're a team," Robert would say proudly, ruffling her hair as she set the table. That Tuesday morning, September 23, 1997, started like any other day in their house. Really. The air was cool, fall just beginning to settle in over the fields outside of town. Ashley came downstairs at 7, wearing jeans and a blue sweater her grandmother had given her. Robert handed her $5 for lunch and a quick hug before she left. "See you after school, kiddo," he said, standing by the front door watching her go. She smiled, waved once, and walked down the driveway toward the street corner where she always went. That was the last time he saw his daughter for 13 long years of searching. The morning passed normally at Lincoln High School, the hallways filled with the usual noise. Ashley attended her first period English class, taking notes on a chapter they were reading. During second period math, she worked quietly on equations alone at her desk. At lunch, she sat with Sarah and Emma in the cafeteria, eating a sandwich and talking about a history test they had scheduled for that coming Friday. "You studying tonight?" Sarah asked, picking at her food without much interest shown. "Yeah, probably," Ashley said softly, her voice always quiet, even among friends she trusted. "My dad's working late, so I'll have time to focus on it at home." The afternoon continued without anything unusual happening that anyone noticed at all. Ashley attended biology class, then study hall, where she finished homework for the next day. When the final bell rang at 3:15, students poured out of the building. Most headed towards the front parking lot, where the buses waited to take them home. But Ashley usually walked home. It was only about 1.5 miles away. She liked the quiet time alone, the chance to think about things without anyone else around. One classmate later remembered seeing Ashley walking toward the side exit near the gym building. She was alone, carrying her backpack, her head down like she was thinking about something deeply. That student had called out to her, "Hey, Ashley, you walking home today too?" Ashley had turned, smiled briefly, nodded once, then kept walking toward the exit door ahead. That was the last confirmed sighting anyone could later verify when police asked around. The side exit led to a small parking area used mostly by staff members only. Beyond that was a sidewalk that connected to the main road leading toward town. It was a route Ashley had walked hundreds of times before without any problems ever. The area was visible from the street, not hidden or isolated at all, really. But on that Tuesday afternoon, something happened between that exit and the main road. Something that left no witnesses, no sounds, no signs of what occurred in those brief moments. By 4:30, Robert was closing up the shop for the day, wiping grease off his hands. Ashley usually got home around 3:45, and by now she'd be in the kitchen making a snack or doing homework at the table like she always did every afternoon. When he walked through the front door just before 5, the house was quiet and still. No music playing upstairs. No sound of her voice calling out hello like usual every day. Her backpack wasn't by the door. Her shoes weren't kicked off in the hallway like always. He called her name once, then twice, his voice echoing through the empty rooms around him. Nothing. No answer. Just silence filling the spaces between his words spoken into the air. He checked her room, the bathroom, even the basement, thinking maybe she'd fallen asleep somewhere. But she wasn't anywhere inside the house at all. And that's when the worry started. By 5:30, worry started creeping in slowly but surely into his tight chest. He called her best friend Sarah, asked if Ashley had stopped by after school today. Sarah said no. She hadn't seen her since lunch earlier that afternoon at school. He called Emma next, got the same answer from her, confused by the question. She said she was walking home. Emma told him over the phone, quietly concerned. "I figured she'd be there by now. Is everything okay, Mr. Morgan?" Robert tried to keep his voice steady, not wanting to alarm the girls unnecessarily yet. "Yeah, just checking. Thanks, Emma." But inside, his stomach was twisting into knots. By 6 o'clock, Robert was driving his truck slowly through town, checking the library where she sometimes studied, the corner store where she bought candy, the park by the river where kids hung out. Nothing. No sign of her anywhere. He looked around the small town he knew so well. He drove past the school, circled the parking lot twice, his eyes scanning for any sign of her blue sweater or the backpack she always carried with her everywhere. At 7, panic replaced worry completely, settling deep in his bones like ice forming. He drove back to the school, parked near the side exit where she'd been seen. The area was empty now, just a few cars belonging to teachers working late inside. He got out, walked the path she would have taken toward the main road slowly. The sidewalk was clear, nothing unusual, no signs of struggle or disturbance visible anywhere. He called her name into the growing darkness. "Ashley," his voice echoing off the buildings. Only silence answered him back, and the emptiness felt heavier than anything he'd ever carried. By 8 o'clock that night, Robert called the Riverside Police Department, his voice shaking badly. The dispatcher asked the usual questions calmly, professionally, like she'd been trained to do always. How old is she? What was she wearing today? Has she ever run away before from home? Robert answered no to the last question firmly, his voice cracking with rising emotion. "She's not that kind of kid," he said, his hands gripping the phone so tight it hurt. "She always comes home on time, every day. Something's wrong, I know it. Please help me." The dispatcher told him an officer would come by the house to take a report soon. Officer Mike Harrison arrived at 8:45, young and professional in his approach to things. He sat in the living room, notepad open, asking questions carefully, one by one, slowly. "You're sure there wasn't an argument this morning before she left for school?" Robert shook his head hard, his hands clasped together tight in his lap nervously. "No, everything was fine. She was normal, happy, just going to school like always. We talked about dinner plans for tonight. She wanted spaghetti, her favorite meal I make. Harrison wrote down every detail carefully. The blue sweater, the brown hair, the backpack she carried. Sometimes teenagers stay with friends without telling their parents, he said gently, cautiously even. It happens more than you'd think in small towns like this one here. Robert's answer was quiet, but firm in tone, his eyes meeting the officer's directly. Not Ashley. She's too responsible. She always calls if she's going to be late coming home. Always without fail. Every single time before now. This isn't like her at all. By 10 that night, a missing person bulletin was issued to all patrol units in the area. Officers checked the bus station, the train depot 20 miles away, the highway rest stops. Nothing came back. No sightings reported anywhere around the region they searched through. The night grew colder. Frost forming on car windows parked outside on the streets. Robert stood by the front window of his house, watching every pair of headlights that turned down Maple Avenue, praying one would finally stop in front of his house. None did, and the streets stayed quiet all night long until morning came again. Around midnight, he drove back to the school himself. Unable to sit still anymore, he parked near the side exit where Ashley had last been seen walking away. He got out, walked the path slowly, shining his flashlight along the fence line. The ground was damp with dew, a few leaves scattered across the pavement underfoot. He called her name softly into the darkness surrounding him completely now everywhere. Ashley, his voice breaking on the syllables, hoping she might somehow answer back to him. Only silence answered, the wind rustling through the trees lining the empty parking lot. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he returned home, leaving the porch light on burning bright. He couldn't bring himself to turn it off, as if the light might guide her home. He sat at the kitchen table, phone beside him, his head in his hands. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second feeling like an hour passing. Every few minutes, he looked toward the door, waiting, hoping, praying it would open. By dawn, the police had organized a search team of volunteers from around town. Officers walked her route from school to home, questioned early morning commuters and store clerks. Nobody had seen her yesterday afternoon or evening anywhere in Riverside at all, it seemed. They checked the riverbank, the old factory lot, the trails behind the school carefully. The ground was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of struggle anywhere they looked around. If you've ever felt that sick dread when someone you love just vanishes completely, you understand the terror Robert Morgan lived through that first night without his daughter. By mid-morning, more volunteers arrived to help search the surrounding areas thoroughly and completely. Flyers were printed with Ashley's photo, her name in bold letters across the top. Robert helped tape them to telephone poles, his fingers numb from the cold air. Neighbors came out to join the search, their faces worried, their voices quiet with concern. Local reporters showed up, cameras rolling, asking for statements from anyone who'd talk to them. Robert couldn't speak, his throat too tight with fear to form words that made sense. By afternoon, search dogs were brought in from the county sheriff's department nearby. They followed Ashley's scent from the school to the side exit, then along the sidewalk for about 50 yards before the trail just stopped cold suddenly at the curb. The handler looked confused, tried again, got the same result each time they tested. It's like she got into a car right here, he said, pointing at the spot. The scent just ends completely at this point on the street. No continuaste anywhere. Detective Linda Hayes, assigned to lead the case, arrived that evening as the sun set. She was in her 40s, experienced, known for being thorough and careful with cases always. She reviewed the search reports, studied the map of Ashley's usual route home carefully. No witnesses saw her get into any vehicle, she said quietly to the other officers. No one heard anything unusual, no screams, no sounds of a struggle at all. The pieces didn't fit together in any way that made sense to anyone investigating. By the end of that second day, the search had covered a 5-mile radius around the school and found absolutely nothing to explain where Ashley had gone so quickly. Her bank account hadn't been touched, her savings still there untouched in full. No bus tickets purchased, no train rides taken, no credit card activity anywhere in the system. Detective Hayes stood in the school parking lot as darkness fell over the town again. The floodlights illuminated the empty pavement, the same spot where Ashley had last been seen. "Someone took her," Hayes said to Officer Harrison, standing beside her quietly now in the dark. This wasn't a runaway. This was planned, and whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. That night, Robert sat in Ashley's bedroom, the lights off, staring at her things, the stuffed animals on her bed, the posters on her walls, the books stacked neatly on her desk, waiting for her to come back and read them again someday. He picked up her pillow, held it close, and whispered into the silence around him. "Where are you, baby? Please come home to me. Please be safe out there." Outside, the porch light burned bright against the darkness of the Indiana night. The search would continue tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. But somewhere between the moment Ashley walked out of Lincoln High School and the moment she disappeared from the sidewalk, a quiet town lost a child it would search for over a decade without finding any answers that made sense to anyone at all. Our community of families dealing with missing loved ones knows that the first 48 hours are critical. That every minute counts when someone vanishes without a trace like this girl. And in those first hours, Riverside mobilized, searched, and prayed with everything they had. But Ashley Morgan had vanished as if she'd never existed at all in the first place. And in the days ahead, the search would only grow more desperate and difficult. By the end of the first week, the search for Ashley Morgan had consumed Riverside completely. Volunteers walked through fields and woods from dawn until dark every single day. Flyers with her face covered every store window, every telephone pole, every corner. Local news stations ran her photo every night. The same smiling picture from school. The police hotline rang constantly, but each tip led nowhere, just false sightings far away. Detective Hayes expanded the investigation beyond Riverside, sending Ashley's photo to every police department within 200 miles of town, checking bus stations, shelters, hospitals, everywhere possible. Nothing came back with solid information they could use to move forward at all. By the second week, the media attention started fading away slowly but steadily. Reporters moved on to other stories. The search teams grew smaller each passing day. Only Robert and a handful of neighbors continued walking the streets, calling her name. Hayes interviewed everyone who knew Ashley, starting with classmates and teachers at school. Most described her the same way. Quiet, shy, kept to herself mostly, always. Her two close friends said Ashley never talked about running away or being unhappy. She was just normal. She was just normal. One friend told the detective through streaming tears. The investigation turned to school staff next. Everyone who'd had regular contact with her. One name stood out on the list Hayes reviewed carefully that quiet afternoon. David Pierce, a security guard who'd worked at Lincoln High for 3 years now. He was friendly, always chatting with students between classes in the hallways, one teacher said simply when asked. He knew all the kids by name. Hayes brought Pierce in for a routine interview like everyone else on the list. He arrived cooperative and calm, wearing his security uniform with his badge clipped. "I heard about Ashley," he said, shaking his head sadly when asked about her. "Terrible thing." Clears throat. "I hope you find her soon and bring her home safe." Hayes asked where he'd been the day Ashley disappeared from school that afternoon. "Working my shift until 4 o'clock. Then I went home like I always do every day." Hayes asked if he'd seen Ashley that day around the school building or outside. "I might have," he said after thinking for a moment before answering carefully. "Here. I see so many kids every day. Hard to remember specific ones sometimes." Honestly, nothing about his answers raised red flags at the time for Hayes reviewing. He had no criminal record, no complaints, nothing suspicious at all on the surface. By the end of the first month, the investigation had stalled without new leads. The police had interviewed over 100 people, checked every location within 50 miles. Nothing pointed to where Ashley had gone or who might have taken her away. For Robert Morgan, life became a strange kind of waiting that never ended fully. He went to work because he needed money, but his mind was never there. At home, he kept Ashley's room exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her bed unmade, her clothes in the closet, everything waiting for her return. Every night, he sat by the phone, hoping for news that rarely came anymore. The first year passed slowly, marked, clears throat, by small rituals Robert created to survive. On Ashley's 16th birthday in March, he baked a cake and lit candles alone. He sang happy birthday in the empty kitchen, his voice breaking on the words. On the anniversary of her disappearance, he drove to the school and stood where she'd last been seen, hoping somehow she might appear again if he waited. Our community understands that time doesn't heal these wounds. It just changes them. The sharp pain becomes a dull ache that never goes away completely, ever. Meanwhile, just 3 miles across town, Ashley was learning to survive in a nightmare. She'd woken up that first day in a small bedroom with locked windows and doors. David Pierce stood in the doorway, his voice calm, explaining her new reality carefully. "Your father doesn't want you anymore," he'd said. The lie delivered so smoothly, she almost believed it. "The police think you ran away. Nobody's looking for you now, Ashley. Understand." She'd cried for days, begged to go home, promised she wouldn't tell anyone. But he'd only smiled, brought her food, and told her to get used to it. "This is your home now," he'd said, locking the door behind him every time. The room became her entire world for the first 2 years of captivity endured. For walls, one window she couldn't open, a single bed pushed against the corner. He brought her meals, controlled when she could use the bathroom, when lights went on or off, when she could speak or had to stay silent for hours alone. She tried to keep track of time by counting days, but eventually lost count. The isolation was worse than anything physical he did to her back then. The loneliness crushed her spirit slowly until she stopped crying, stopped fighting, stopped hoping. He told her stories about the outside world to maintain control over her mind. "Your father moved away," he'd say casually during dinner he brought to her. "He got remarried, has a new family now. You're just a memory to him." She didn't believe it at first, but as months turned into years without rescue, the doubt crept in slowly, poisoning her hope like acid eating through metal. By the 3rd year, he'd allowed her to move around the house during daytime, but only when he was home, watching her every move she made carefully. She'd learned not to run, not to scream, not to try calling for help. The one time she tried escaping through a window, he'd caught her immediately. The punishment had been severe enough that she never attempted it again after. She'd become a ghost living in his house, cooking meals he demanded, cleaning rooms he controlled, existing in a prison with no bars but walls built from fear. He controlled everything. What she wore, what she ate, what she watched on TV. And he hurt her in ways she couldn't speak about even to herself. The abuse was constant, a reminder that she belonged to him now completely, forever. Sometimes she'd stare at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the person looking back at her with hollow eyes and a face that had aged beyond her years from the weight of secrets she carried alone without anyone knowing. By 2005, 8 years had passed since that September afternoon changed everything forever. Robert's hair had turned gray, his face lined with worry and sleepless nights. He'd stopped going to the school, stopped driving around looking for her everywhere. The hope that burned bright in those first months had dimmed to a small flame he carried quietly inside, never speaking about it to others around him anymore. Detective Hayes had retired. The case passed to newer detectives who reviewed it once a year without finding anything new to investigate further at all. Really now. Ashley would have been 23 by then, a young woman. But Robert could only picture her as 15, frozen in time on the day she'd walked out the door. The flyers around town had faded completely, torn down or covered by newer posters. Only a few remained at the post office and library, yellowed and curled at the edges. Riverside had moved on, as towns do, but Robert remained stuck in that moment. Then, in early 2010, something shifted in Ashley after 13 years of captivity endured. Pierce had grown complacent, less watchful, more confident she'd never leave him now. He'd started allowing her to walk to the corner store alone to buy groceries. Always with strict instructions to return immediately, always with threats about what would happen if she tried anything stupid like running or talking to people around town here. At first, She'd been too terrified to even look at other people in the store. But slowly, over weeks of these short trips, something inside her began waking up. She'd see families shopping together, hear children laughing, watch normal life happening around her. And she'd remember that she'd once had that, too, before it was stolen away. One afternoon in late April, she walked into Wilson's Grocery, a small store on the east side of town. She'd been visiting for several weeks now regularly. The owner, Tom Wilson, was a kind-faced man in his 60s who always smiled at customers and remembered their names without asking them what they needed each time. He'd noticed the nervous young woman who came in buying small amounts of food weekly. She never made eye contact, never spoke unless necessary, always glanced at the door, like someone might burst through and grab her any second if she wasn't careful. Tom had been running the store for over 30 years, knew the rhythms of his neighborhood, knew when something felt off about a person shopping there alone. Nervous. This young woman felt off in a way that bothered him deeply inside somehow. Over the next few weeks, Tom started paying closer attention to her visits carefully. He noticed she always came at the same time, always bought the same things. Bread, milk, soup, nothing that suggested she was shopping for herself really freely. And there was always a man waiting outside on the corner when she left. Never coming in, just standing there smoking, watching her walk toward him, head down quick. One evening near closing time, she came in later than usual, the store empty. Tom was stacking shelves when he heard her voice behind him quietly speaking up. "Mr. Wilson," she said softly, her voice shaking badly with rising emotion clearly. He turned around, saw her standing there holding a carton of milk tightly. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered, glancing toward the window nervously, then back. "Of course," Tom said gently, setting down the box he was holding carefully now. She took a deep breath, tears filling her eyes as she struggled to speak. "If someone has been missing for a really long time, and they wanted to come home, do you think people would still want them back after all these years?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and important and desperate sounding. Tom looked at her face more carefully now, really seeing her for the first time. Something about her eyes, the shape of her face felt familiar in a way he couldn't quite place yet, but it nagged at his memory hard, pulling. Clear his throat. "I think," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully and deliberately here now, "that if someone went missing, their family would never stop wanting them back home." She nodded quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks as she tried to hide from him. Clear his throat. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she hurried out of the store fast. Tom stood there for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities he couldn't grasp. That night, he couldn't shake the conversation from his thoughts at all that evening. He sat at his computer after closing, opened a search engine, typed carefully and slowly, *missing people. Riverside, Indiana. He searched, holding his breath as results appeared on screen. The first result that appeared made his heart stop cold in his chest. Ashley Morgan, missing since 1997. Last seen at Lincoln High School, Riverside, Indiana. The photo was old, grainy, a school picture of a 15-year-old girl smiling. But when Tom looked at it closely, comparing it to the young woman in his store, he saw her. The same eyes, the same mouth, just older, thinner, haunted now, but unmistakably the same person who'd asked if people would still want her back. "Dear God," Tom whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief and shock washing over him. He printed the missing person poster, stared at it for hours that night, deciding whether he was crazy or whether he just found a girl everyone thought was gone. By morning, he'd made his decision, knowing he couldn't stay silent about this discovery. If there was even a chance that young woman was Ashley Morgan, he had to tell someone, had to give her the chance to come home finally. The next day, he'd walk into the police station and change everything for a family that had been waiting 13 years for an answer to their prayers spoken. The next morning, Tom Wilson walked into the Riverside Police Department with a printed copy of Ashley Morgan's missing person poster clutched in his hand, his heart pounding hard. The desk sergeant looked up, recognized Tom from around town for years now living here. "What can I do for you, Mr. Wilson?" the officer asked politely, setting down his coffee cup. Tom placed the poster on the counter, his voice low but steady despite nerves showing. "I think I've seen her," he said, pointing at Ashley's photo with a trembling finger. "I think that missing girl has been coming into my store for weeks now, regularly." Within, Detective Sarah Mills was sitting across from Tom in an interview room. She'd pulled Ashley's case file from storage, the thick folder spread out before her. Tom described the young woman who'd been visiting his store. Her nervous behavior, the question she'd asked about whether people would still want someone back after so long missing here. Mills listened carefully, taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail Tom provided. "Can you describe her more specifically?" Mills asked, leaning forward in her chair intently. "Height, weight, any distinguishing features you noticed on her at all?" Tom thought carefully, picturing the young woman in his mind clearly and precisely now. "Maybe 5 feet 4 inches, very thin, probably under 100 pounds, I'd guess honestly. Dark brown hair, usually in a ponytail. She has a small scar above her left eyebrow." Mills flipped through the file quickly, found Ashley's original description from 1997. "Matches," she said quietly, her pulse quickening with possibility rising inside her. Ashley had that scar from falling off her bike when she was 12 years old. Tom felt his breath catch, the reality of what he'd discovered sinking in fully. "Now there's something else," he added, his voice dropping lower, still in the quiet room. "She always looks terrified, like someone might grab her any second if she's not careful. And sometimes there's a man waiting outside for her when she leaves the store alone." Mills asked Tom to describe the man as best he could from memory of seeing him. Middle-aged, maybe early 50s now. Gray hair, medium build, nothing too distinctive really about him. But the way she acts around him, it's like she's scared of him constantly. Mills made detailed notes, asked Tom if he knew where the woman might be living. Tom shook his head, but he'd seen them walking towards the east side of town. "That direction," he said, pointing on a map spread out before them on the table. "Past the old mill toward those small houses on Fletcher Street over there, I think." By that afternoon, Mills had assembled a small team of officers to investigate quietly. They drove through the east side neighborhood, noting which houses matched Tom's description. One house in particular stood out. A small one-story with faded paint and drawn curtains. A car sat in the driveway, old but maintained, registered to David Pierce. It showed clearly. Mills felt something click in her mind when she saw that name appear on records. David Pierce, the former security guard from Lincoln High School back in 1997. Then she pulled his file immediately, reviewed the interview notes from 13 years ago carefully. He'd been cooperative, had an alibi, nothing suspicious at the time they'd questioned him. But now, seeing his name connected to a house where a frightened young woman might be living, Mills felt her instincts screaming that something was very wrong here. She requested surveillance on the house immediately. Officers watched from unmarked cars parked down the street for 2 days. They observed the property carefully, noting when Pierce left for work, at a warehouse job, and when he returned home each evening like clockwork running smooth. On the 3rd day, they saw her clearly through the window for a brief moment. A young woman moving inside the house, her face partially visible before the curtain closed. Mills compared the glimpse to Ashley's age progression photos the department had made years ago. The resemblance was strong enough to act on, strong enough to get a warrant. On May 18, 2010, at 7 o'clock in the morning, police surrounded the small house. Mills knocked on the door firmly, her badge held up clearly visible to anyone inside. "Police, open the door," she called out, her voice authoritative and commanding the situation. For a long moment, nothing happened. No sound from inside at all, it seemed. Then the door opened slowly, and David Pierce stood there in his bathrobe, looking confused. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice calm, but his eyes shifting nervously between officers. "We have a warrant to search this property," Mills said, handing him the paperwork officially. "Step outside, please, and keep your hands where we can see them clearly." Pierce complied, his face draining of color as officers moved past him into the house. Mills entered last, her eyes scanning the living room that looked ordinary enough on first glance. Old furniture, a television, dishes in the sink. Nothing unusual visible right away here. But then she heard it. A soft sound from the back of the house somewhere. A door opening slowly, footsteps approaching carefully down the hallway toward them now coming. And then she appeared, thin and pale, wearing clothes that hung loose on her frame. Her dark brown hair pulled back, her eyes wide with fear and hope mixed together. Mills stepped forward slowly, her voice gentle but firm in tone toward the young woman. "My name is Detective Sarah Mills. Can you tell me your name, please?" The young woman's lips trembled, tears filling her eyes as she struggled to speak clearly. "Ashley," she whispered, her voice breaking on the single word spoken aloud finally. "My name is Ashley Morgan, and I want to go home to my father." The room seemed to freeze in that moment, every officer standing perfectly still, processing. Mills felt her chest tighten with emotion she'd trained herself to control over the years. "You're safe now," Mills said softly, stepping closer to Ashley carefully and slowly. "You're safe, and we're going to take you home to your family right now." Ashley collapsed into tears, her body shaking with sobs she'd held back for years. A female officer wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, guided her gently to a patrol car. As they led her out, she glanced back once at David Pierce standing in handcuffs, her expression unreadable, a mix of fear and something else Mills couldn't quite identify. Then Pierce said nothing, his face blank, his eyes on the ground avoiding everyone's gaze. At the police station, Ashley was taken to a private room away from cameras and reporters who'd already started gathering outside after hearing the news spreading fast. Now, a counselor trained in trauma cases sat with her, offering water and gentle questions slowly. Detective Mills entered after Ashley had been given time to calm down and breathe. "Ashley," Mills began carefully, sitting across from her in the small room quietly. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Can you tell me how you ended up at that house with David Pierce all these years ago?" Ashley took a shaky breath, her hands wrapped around a cup of water tightly. "He was a security guard at my school," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "He started talking to me in the hallways, being nice, asking about my life. I was shy, didn't have many friends, and he made me feel like someone cared." Mills nodded, making notes, letting Ashley speak at her own pace without rushing her. "One day after school, he offered me a ride home because it was raining hard. I said yes because I knew him, thought he was safe to trust back then." Ashley's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face as she continued the story. "But he didn't take me home. He drove to his house instead. Said he had something to show me first before dropping me off at my place. When we got there, he locked the door behind me and wouldn't let me leave." Mills felt anger rising inside her, but kept her voice calm and steady for Ashley. "Did he hurt you?" she asked gently, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Ashley nodded, unable to speak for a moment as sobs overtook her completely now. "He told me my father didn't want me anymore," she finally whispered through tears. "He said everyone thought I'd run away, that no one was looking for me. He said if I tried to leave, he'd hurt my father or me worse. I believed him because I was just 15 and didn't know what else to do." Mills reached across the table, placed her hand gently on Ashley's without saying anything. The silence held more comfort than words could have provided in that moment between them. "He kept me locked in a room for the first few years," Ashley continued. "I wasn't allowed out except to use the bathroom when he was home watching. Later, he said I could move around the house, but I couldn't leave ever. He controlled everything. What I ate, what I wore, when I could speak or not. I tried to run once early on, but he caught me. And after that, I was too scared to try again for a long time until recently now." Mills asked carefully about the abuse, knowing this was difficult but necessary for building a case. Ashley nodded slowly, her voice dropping to a whisper barely heard in the room. "He hurt me in ways I can't talk about yet," she said, her eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet Mills' gaze directly as she spoke now. "For 13 years, he treated me like I belonged to him, like I was his." The words hung in the air, heavy and painful, but finally spoken aloud to someone. Mills took a deep breath, her professional training keeping her focused despite the rage she felt. "You were incredibly brave to get help," Mills said firmly, her voice strong for Ashley. "What you did asking that question in the store, that took courage most people don't have. You saved yourself, and now we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." Within hours, the news spread through Riverside like wildfire, burning through dry grass fast. Ashley Morgan, missing for 13 years, had been found alive just 3 miles from her home. Robert Morgan was at work when Detective Mills called him personally to deliver the news. "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice steady but emotional despite her training showing through. "We found your daughter. Ashley is alive and she's safe now finally after all this time." Robert dropped the wrench he was holding, the metal clanging loud on the concrete floor. "What?" he whispered, unable to process the words he was hearing from her over the phone. "Where is she? Can I see her right now, please? I need to see her." Mills told him to come to the station immediately, and Robert ran to his truck, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the key in the ignition, starting it. The drive took 10 minutes, but it felt like hours passing slowly in his mind, racing. When he arrived, reporters were already gathered outside, cameras flashing, microphones extended toward him. He ignored them all, pushed through to the entrance where Mills was waiting for him. "She's inside," Mills said gently, guiding him through the station carefully and slowly. "She's been through a lot, Mr. Morgan. She's going to need time to heal." Robert nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion overwhelming him completely now. Mills opened a door, and there she was, sitting on a couch with a blanket around her shoulders, thinner than he remembered, older, but unmistakably his daughter, still clearly. "Ashley," he whispered, his voice breaking on her name, spoken for the first time in years. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, and stood slowly on shaky legs, trembling. "Dad," she said, her voice small, like a child again, calling for him to help. Robert crossed the room in 3 steps, wrapped his arms around her tightly without hesitation. They stood there for a long time, both crying, both holding on like letting go might make her disappear again into the darkness she'd come from before now. "I never stopped looking," Robert whispered into her hair, his voice choked with tears. "I never gave up on you. Not once in 13 years of searching everywhere." "I know," Ashley whispered back, her face buried in his shoulder, safe at last. "I always knew you were out there waiting for me to come back home." The reunion was quiet, private, away from the cameras and questions that would come later. For now, it was just a father and daughter, separated for 13 years, finally together. Outside the station, Detective Mills addressed the press briefly, her statement simple and direct. "Ashley Morgan has been found alive. A suspect is in custody and charges will be filed. This is an ongoing investigation, so we can't provide more details at this time." David Pierce was charged with kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and multiple counts of sexual assault committed over the 13 years he'd held Ashley captive in his home, hidden from everyone. The evidence was overwhelming. Ashley's testimony, the locked room in his house documented, the timeline matching her disappearance exactly to when he'd taken her from school that day. His trial was scheduled for the following year, and he pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy public trial that would have forced Ashley to testify in front of cameras. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole for decades. The judge's words were harsh and clear during sentencing day in the courtroom full. "You stole 13 years from this young woman," the judge said, his voice cold. "You robbed her of her childhood, her teenage years, her freedom and dignity completely. There is no sentence that can return what you took, but you will spend the rest of your life behind bars for what you've done to her and her family. Our community knows that justice doesn't erase the years lost or the trauma endured, but it provides closure, a line drawn between the past and the future moving forward." For Ashley, recovery was a long and difficult journey that required patience and support. She stayed with her father, slowly relearning how to live in the world outside captivity. Simple things like going to the grocery store alone, sleeping without fear, trusting people again. These were all challenges she faced every day with the help of counselors and therapists. Robert never left her side during those first months, taking time off work to be there. He cooked her favorite meals from when she was 15, played music she'd loved back then, trying to rebuild the connection they'd lost over 13 years of separation and pain suffered. Slowly, Ashley began to find her voice again, speaking publicly about her experience to help other victims of abduction and abuse know they weren't alone in their suffering endured silently. "If you're out there and you're scared," she said in one interview months later, "know that there are people who will help you if you ask for it. One question, one moment of courage can change everything for you and bring you home." The town of Riverside rallied around the Morgan family, offering support and privacy both. Tom Wilson became a quiet hero, the man who'd noticed what others had missed. He never sought attention, but Robert visited the store often to thank him personally. "You gave me my daughter back," Robert said, shaking Tom's hand firmly one afternoon. "I'll never be able to repay you for what you did by paying attention." Tom just smiled, his eyes wet with emotion he tried to hide away. "I just asked a question," he said quietly. "She's the brave one who answered it." Years later, the house on Maple Avenue no longer felt like the sad house anymore. The porch light still burned every evening, but now it was just a light, not a symbol of hope waiting to be fulfilled or lost forever in darkness surrounding. Ashley had moved on with her life, working with organizations that supported missing children and survivors of abuse, sharing her story to give others the strength they needed desperately. She never forgot the 13 years stolen from her, but she refused to let them define the rest of her life, moving forward into the future ahead. And on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the trees lining Maple Avenue, Robert and Ashley would sit on the porch together, talking, laughing, simply being alive. The past was still there, a shadow that would never fully disappear from memory. But so was the present and the future, and the knowledge that even after 13 years in darkness, light had found its way back into their lives finally. If the story reminded you that hope never dies, that survivors are stronger than their captors, that one person paying attention can save a life, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that missing doesn't mean gone forever, that families can be reunited even after years apart. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from right now tonight here, because somewhere out there, another person is still waiting to be found and brought home. And our community's support helps keep their stories alive until that moment comes for them. Thank you for being here with us, for caring about these real stories of survival that remind us all that the human spirit is stronger than any darkness surrounding. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep believing in miracles always.